Good morning, gentle readers. It is Saturday in November. Sunday, rather, excuse me, which should make it as about the 13th, I suppose. And today is an installment in the new Logos 2000. Logos 2000 is the idea of the philosophical foreground in the 21st century. And as with regards to being paleoclassical and canonical and dogmatic, of course, as with regards to our Western canon and the East and West. And then as with regards to how many times I'm going to say as with regards to, it will be many. And if it's more than 100, it might be a record. And so then with regards to Logos 2000, what the concept is to further explore and flesh out the concepts of the 20th century philosophy, as it says, arrived at the logicus as positivism and the usual notion since the cyclic metaphysic of the reconnecting the teleological and the technical philosophy, 0, 1, and infinity, null in the universe as a thing, as a holistic monism, is that it's in a very sense a very real interobjective and realist sense of the terms. So what I've done here is I've figured to read some more of these books as with regards to some of these 20th century philosophers that were being looked at, and with regards to Nelson Goodman is kind of who he'd arrived at looking to in the previous discourse a bit, because he does at least say that logic is lacking, and he does study the philosophy as with regards to at least framing some of the things, kind of like Alan Badiou does, in terms of the technical, the logical, the foundations of the logic, and these kind of fundamental aspects usually is in accordance with modern mathematics. The set theoretic account is after Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory from since the time of Frege and then Russell and the concept script and begriff script of Frege, and the type theory of Russell is basically emulating Peirce, C.S. Peirce, Charles Sanders Peirce. Then there's arrived at the Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory from the time of Marimonoff, who is a great theoretician and helped explore that there must be the extraordinary. Then with regards to the ordinals and the ordering theory and the sets and the set theory, that they have an interplay, that one or the other is finds the other, and then as with regards to the discussion and the comment made a couple episodes ago and the moment in motion, that the theory of one relation is represented various ways as with regards to what elements relate to what, and vis-a-vis the set theory and ordering theory and equality or inequality, that it's among the ideas that set theory and class theory make for set class distinction for the extraordinary. And then there's that like set part distinction represents two different theories, sets or parts, getting into things like the boundaries of Brentano as one of the touchstones of the philosophy that the technical philosophers and the logicians will know about. That then the idea is to get some more into these books and kind of and make a reading of them and see what they will convey with regards to the longer discussion here about moment and motion, whereas described definitions of moment and motion for the 21st century, Newton's zeroth laws, and what's perceived the needful and what's perceived lacking and deficient in the current account, which is as well so great. And then since Lagrange, that it was well be able to attain to all these particular requirements and desiderata of the theory to be Lagrangian and to be a theory of sum of potentials, that this sum of history is sum of potentials with these competing yet complementary concepts of attenuation and dissipation and oscillation and restitution make for the tendencies and propensities that for our theory of least action with a gradient, that the energy and entelechy arrive as sort of unified whole again, and then to help kind of put down some of these otherwise the existentialism and nihilism, which aren't really either and to help explain that that's just is relating to the void and the universal again, in the thorough kind of conception of these things. And then it can arrive at deductively that there's only one theory that can possibly be logically and technically, and so that there is one. It has that if there were a multiverse of these ones, that only one of them is yet still so real. The multiverse concept is only to be kind of considered as everybody's own frame of thought, frame of reference, body of knowledge, and the fact that it is quite so. And since Leibniz's monadology, that everybody is an independent, free-thinking individual, that it is well, that none of us really has the one true theory, and as regards to the absolute and the omni and these kinds of revered, most sublime ideas, that then we yet have our absolute technically and our sublime technically and the extraordinary technically, because mathematics really needs it to be able to explain things in the infinite and laws of large numbers and the theory of an object that's a continuum. And it's because physics is otherwise kind of stuck with having some classical mathematics, yet that doesn't explore what's the extraordinary of the non-standard / nonlinear, yet is as well part of the mathematics, part of the fuller mathematics. So let's take a look at some of these books and see what they might have. The Dictionary of the History of Science is surely so great. This is from the 1980s, and it really was just something, there's much to be read of it. A History of Medicine, Civilization and Disease, A History of Pathology, A History of Nutrition, The Modern Rise of Population, Mathematics in the Time of the Pharaohs, From Frege to Gödel. Gödel is an interesting character, particularly in the Foundations, because he gives both completeness and incompleteness theorems. And then for there to be a consistent and complete theory, it would have to be this extraordinary theory is what's arrived at. And for axiomaless natural deduction, or if you will, universally axiomatized theory, that such a thing exists, is a simple readout of this Comenius language that's deemed to be all the truisms, whether negations or affirmations, then what so follows is that being correct. Space through the ages, from the C. Lancius, K. Menninger's number words and number symbols, A History of Computing. Some of the other concepts that you're going to get into a Logos 2000 are the theory of computing. And so that's really kind of what I studied or been my trade for 15, 20, or 30 years is writing programs for the computers. And so with regards to well-defined behavior and defined behavior with regards to the model of a program and the object-oriented model, the event-oriented model, the functional programming model, these are all considered kind of one thing, and the software engineering is, of course, quite a softer science than computer engineering or electrical engineering for itself, which is also part of the theory. The Dictionary of the History of Ideas, Studies of Selected Pivotal Ideas, 4 volumes, plus an index. Scholarship in the History of the Behavioral Sciences, The Career of Philosophy. What is this thing called science? Philosophies of science. So we have theory and science, and science is a particularly strong theory, and scientism, then logical positivism, of course, is a great, great thing. And it makes, though, that we have to have, after inductive logic, we got to have a deductive logic. Aristotle has prior and posterior accounts. It's kind of like Chesterton says in his study of Thomas Aquinas. He says he just thinks people who think that they can do without the deductive and just make any contradiction in any irrelevant thing is entirely hazardous and is not considered thorough. And there's an inductive case for it, there's an inductive case against it, and there's a deductive case against it. And so people who pick one to just kind of confirm their biases are perceived to be, at best, simplistic. Not to be casting shade on usual matters of inference and the tentative and all the models, and then what does arrive as paths through these strokes of the inference that make the marks that represent truth on the way through. it's only be said that that is what it is, not what it is not. Relevance logic. These books here are part of the collocation was from moment in motion because it helps reflect the hypercube distance for Zeno's swath, which is part of all these paths that arrive in the consideration of any multidimensional space as with resulting to any quantity 1.0. And here this book is about that in a square or the planar, and then the idea is to figure out kind of how that arrives at in the multidimensional or the infinitely dimensional, which formally here there is. And it doesn't take a Hilbert space with all that being complex to be like that. So it can be a plain space of all the real numbers, Euclidean r to the n, real numbers to the natural numbers. That's what it's usually considered, that it's an infinitude of dimensions, and then as with regards to what order or quantity that is of all the things, it's figured that in time that all the contingencies are present, and then at the next time all the unfulfilled contingencies are absent. So only all the fulfillable contingencies are present at any moment in time. And so it does not result like this combinatorial explosion of the dimensions, and it helps a lot to reduce problems in physics like functional freedom, which just means functional combinatorial explosion, really, and that there's a way to make it so that by getting rid of ex falso nihilum, that out of a fallacy can be derived anything, even the more fallacious. Then instead there's, or that being ex falso quod lebe, that ex falso nihilum is proper and says that those unfulfilled contingencies are never fulfilled at all. They're still free to exist in a realm of thought and contingent theory, and that can be modal itself. But there's only one modal temporal theory that's reality and an interobjective. That's part of the usual concern here. Nobody actually has that specifically, but we still have to kind of attain and build to that as vis-a-vis a warren of all these different trails, each one a particular world, that is not the world. Those are homes of thought and thinking beings. So gentle readers, that's some of the ideas here in this 21st century philosophy, that it's some of the classical ideas about that there being a systematics and there being determinism, yet as well that because the information is free and the active intelligent actors, you, me, anybody who can employ the information advantage to gain, for example, mechanical advantage or any other kind of difference in what's otherwise a system determined by this sum of histories, sum of potentials, least action and a gradient. That this is to say we don't necessarily need logicist positivism to get out of natural order, and that we can still have determinism and as with regards to free will, and then that doesn't excuse anybody's responsibility. Yet there are limits, and we all attain then to this higher theory, from which we must deduce the greatest structures of mathematics, all the zeros and ones here. Cantor space of three varieties for three definitions of continua, three at least laws of large numbers, three kinds of statistical limit theorems, the central, the uniform, the polar, and then as with regards to things like the spiral space filling curve being its own derivative and antiderivative, and distinctness results after uniqueness results in singularity and multiplicity theory. All one theory, and not really unattainable, but it definitely demands that for the critical account of things, critical rationality and critical reason, that there's a fuller and wider dialectic, and that this is usually introduced in school as part of what are proofs, and not just inductive proofs, but deductive analysis. And the usual most common exercise of these begin in the closed with the process of elimination, and the idea that it's in the relevance of things that are so, and then become exclusive, become their own uniqueness in a closed system, like the logic puzzles of who lives on the street with what car, with what pet, with what wife, with what pastime, and these kinds of things that can then be struck out and closed and fixed, or otherwise to fill in the numbers, and even like a crossword puzzle or something like that. Although there could be two words that fit with the same definition, or two solutions to the same puzzle. The idea that there are puzzles with only one solution, and deductive analysis finds those. And then that can be written out in a much, much, much longer course after the fact as an inductive thing. But that just helps to find then a trace to recreate the exact same puzzle, and helps none at all in a new one, which is where it becomes so that the deductive inference becomes the more primary sort of thinking things over and thinking things through, vis-a-vis induction and thinking things through or reading things out. Then this other book is as with regards to the zollfrei metric, which is about the Euclid has a smooth plane, its geometries, and it's ideal, and it's perfectly flat. And then Poincare makes a sort of rough plane, and it just says that, well, it's perfectly flat, yet at the same time it's everywhere rough, and there's as of a grain to it. But that grain is infinitely fine. So it's just helping to explain that a continuous manifold, as a continuous space, is then a continuous reticulation of this space. And this is why the zollfrei metric is introduced in these sorts of accounts, because something has to give, and so the idea is that it gives everywhere, none at all. And then that works out this kind of 0, 1, and infinity bit, where the 0, 1, and infinity, or the identity expression constants, are so central in all mathematics that they are considered to be even before the rest of the numbers. Well, so far I've been getting away with less of the in as with regards to, which is one of my favorite ways to say something relates, or is about, or is from, or is for, or connects to, or otherwise relates to these things. That it's also a way to kind of fill the space of the words, and that it's considered to be as a sort of a comma, vis-a-vis which is rather a pause. There's a general hope to fill the space, to fill the volume of the recording with the spoken word, because the idea is it's as valuable for the time. So the point is that extended pauses, whether there's 17 minutes or not, the old idea that in any natural conversation there's a lull every 17 minutes as a factoid or something to discuss, has that otherwise I'll continue kind of extemporizing, and it's deemed to be an acceptable style, and it's grammatical and so on. So let's keep that figured out as we go along. So looking at this Nelson Goodman for a minute, he's got problems and projects, and so I'll relate this Goodman to Bergson and the logicist positivism in the art movement, and that they are about the ideas that are also associated with the art and the continuum, and the idea that they have a thinking space, a real space, and then an arbitrarily intersubjective space, that those are again one thing, and that then for Home and these theories of art and reasoning of philosophy and the epistemology, or the meaning of things as of the being, that those are all considered to be contingent theories. They're considered to be appropriate theories for a subjective account of things, as about the intersubjective and interobjective, that then here there's a greater theory that's intersubjective itself. It has that, as mentioned already, there's still all the realm for the manners of thinking beings to make of those what they may or what they will. Que sera, sera, what will be, but the future is not yet written. The past is history. And it's all of our history. It's a sum of histories, sum of potentials. So Goodman, he reach to the perceived paradoxes in the mathematical logic to help explain why the riddle of induction, as he put it, is something that is an insurmountable difficulty to otherwise closed theories. And that is about a halfway account of then getting into the pasture, the field of the ideal of reflection and contemplation. And so the other half of that account then is that there is a consistency and completeness. So one example I'll make of that is Goodman's example of a concept halfway between green and blue that he calls GRU. And then as he remarks on it, he says, well, what's blue today and green tomorrow, or vice versa, is GRU. And so according to a temporality, that being the modality, that the inductive inference that's not modal logic has an incompleteness and a hazard, and in reflection in the posterior, a fallacy. And so it goes to show that the examples of Goodman's riddles are merely logical conclusions that reflect that there is a true temporal, that being a true modal logic. And then when having to put the temporal and is for the contingent into everything, like the King of France is the King of France is the King of France, or something like that, has that whether there is or is not a King of France and who he presumably may be is contingent and modal. Yet it has nothing at all to do with the Dauphin at any given time, except that it's contingent. That there is a true modality and temporality, and there's in this sense only one angel on that pin. So that account that became metaphorical is only to reflect that Goodman's riddle is just an account of that modal logic and relevance logic is paramount, and the deductive inference is required, and the inductive inference is, in a sense, it's given to a prior, but it's only resulted as that from a posterior, whereas the deductive inference is the prior and the posterior. So when we think of the prior and posterior, what ideas come from before and what come after, then the idea is that the inductive is picked up and put down, whereas the deductive is held and turned over, and that it's what shows from the deductive what really is true of the inductive. So there's a schism in logic, and since Plotinus, Russell's favorite weasel word guy of a sense, and having material implication and false antecedents and false consequence seeming to fulfill the form of an inductive material implication, that's considered neither, and it's called quasi-modal, and it's not necessarily modal, and any introduction of things that are contingent disturbs it beyond being any more logical. And that hundreds of years before Plotinus, of course, Chrysippus presented the moods and the modal to make our modal, and he helps to reflect for syllogisms how syllogisms can be kept and repaired, that they are also yet relevant and that they are yet modal, and they're always implicitly modal and temporal. And this way, in our logic for our philosophy, and technically, that Aristotle won't be fooled. And he reads his prior and posterior analytics, and he rereads them. Otherwise, it's a good account, and of that this is more so influential in the field of art, from what I understand, and then that there's it's considered accessible to kind of bring in these riddles of induction and this kind of thing, or the paradoxes. But all the paradoxes are only to be resolved. So then anything that's left as a paradox is just a sign of either given up or failure. And otherwise, we have arrived at a logical theory that has no paradoxes at all. It's extraordinary, it's sublime, it is technoanalytic, it is ontological, and it is teleological. And then as with regards to Descartes and since then the idea that we can reason about it, that of course was also part of the reasoning of the accounts thousands of years before that. So we aren't giving anything up in terms of that. Barnes's philosophical predicament, and he helps reflect on that. Besides that, for technical philosophy, we have to have a teleological and an ontological both ways for each other. Then this also reflects on that for the theological, that it's like there's got to be room. And here it's just that there's abstractly always room for the super scientific, and that then the Winston H.F. Barnes' philosophical predicament is pretty cool though, because he's addressing, as he puts it, Moore, Russell, Wittgenstein, and the logical positivists, and being able to put them down in a sense. Hadrian's Wall. This was an ancient Roman escarpment built in Britain. Mercator's projection. Well, that's a great thing. And the projections and perspective are all kinds of relevant to geometry. The absolute or reality. Some of them have maintained for that there's a super individual, the individual capitalized, the absolute capitalized, or reality capitalized with a capital R, or the whole. It is obvious that this view involves at once a complete metaphysics centered around the concept of individuality, and at the same time comes home to men's business and bosoms, and the implication it has for the political and social life. I have stated it in a somewhat unfavorable way to emphasize the approach of the analytic philosopher to the theory. He sees it as based on a failure to realize that statements about nations require to have their misleading logical forms stripped away by analysis. The analysis of England invaded France might take the following form, ... This is far from being a complete analysis, or even a correct one. And in fact, it would be quite impossible in practice to give a complete analysis. But although we cannot complete, but only sketch the analysis, we can see it as alleged that the statement no more implies the existence of a nation, England, distinct from Englishmen, than a statement about the average Englishman implies the existence of a special kind of individual. And what I'm really excited about here is Barnes's description of the holistic monism as the absolute in reality. And what I'll be curious to see is part of his analysis that he gets into the idealism, because the idealism, so this teleological notion is idealism, and that the analysts, the logical positivism sort, or are micro theories, are mini theories as they are. Each one, of course, stands for itself and alone, and being an individual itself. Yeah, then he describes that we have this continuum analysis in the individual of the continuum. From Plato to the English idealists has usually based itself on the argument that time is real. Logical analysis can claim at most to have shown that this particular argument for degrees of reality arises from a misunderstanding. The aim of logical analysis is first to reveal the logical form of statements, obscured as it often is by common language. Secondly, to elicit thereby the fundamental logical ideas required in discourse. Talks about nobody. That's a good one. Because we have the quantifiers, and then we have individuals and things that do or don't exist, but by giving them a name, they exist in the theory. They're contingent as regards to anything fulfills their embodiment, their structure, their model, and the model theory here, of course, what it's all about. Yet at the same time, there's not necessarily the ontological commitment to that, as with regards to there is usually to common knowledge, conventional wisdom often, and other easily approachable and maintainable aspects of reasoning apparatus. That then in the wider logic, then we have a universe, and there's a nothing about it, and both of those kind of result to be the same kind of concern. Either could be the other, from nothing all or from all nothing, and that it constantly vacillates is this dually self-infer consistency. So he identifies more, M-O-R-E, with the logical positivists, and he says he's basically an empirical pragmatist. So logical positivism as empirical pragmatism is not scientific, and it's not necessarily what we would consider the principled. In short, while philosophy is concerned to discover the truth about the whole of reality, analysis is concerned to clarify the meaning of separate statements in the sphere of common sense. So here it's considered that the whole of reality is paramount and is common sense. It's interobjective. So what he's talking about here is working theories of the simple, classical, and finite sort that most logical positivists promote. That here there's a lot stronger logical positivism that's attained to. That this strong mathematical Platonism and strong logical positivism are considered more thoroughly less hypocritical than weak idealism and weak logical positivism. Which, given that they're only weak in that sense, and they don't have much of an ontological commitment to keep to them, and it's not really considered true. It's just true in the theory, or Tarski true, or in terms of being a model, the mental model of things. That this goes to show there's quite an argument about it, and that this was all given to the omni before. This was all the absolutes and the ideals were as of regards to the macro scale of things. Other than this, I was reading some John Stuart Mill, and so John Stuart Mill has got a great textbook on logic, and then that it's got a lot of things about thinking, and so a lot of the stuff would be said to come from John Stuart Mill in terms of the British analytic tradition of the 20th century. And so, and this is interesting. John Stuart Mill is considered kind of a forerunner of this as well, and these same arguments apply about a deductive analysis. So in this book, Barnes has got these contents: the crisis in philosophy, philosophy and common sense, philosophy and analysis. What is analysis? Logicotherapy and neo-positivism. The return to reason. He says logical positivism, though self-consistent, is an incoherent philosophy. It doesn't have a holistic monism. It is incoherent in respect of four doctrines: behaviorism, which conflicts with the conviction that other people exist in the same way as myself, though known in a different way; phenomenalism, which conflicts with the truth of any unfulfilled hypothetical statement about material things; logicism, which is inconsistent with the rational advocacy of the principle of verification; and positivism, which is inconsistent with the principle of having any meaning at all. So this is nice because it gives to this what's perceived to be the weaker logical positivism these things, that it was, as well it's given that what those entail to provide is then somehow still an existent thing. Hypothetical entities such as electrons are neither completely observable nor completely unobservable, so with the minds of other people. Purpose of activity, which characterizes mind as dynamic transaction, characterizes matter, is not observed. It's not so necessarily relayed. It can be kind of communicated, and that's a point of communication. But it's good here that some of this it really helps to provide what was the bulwark of an ability to reject the weaker logical positivism is good, because otherwise when a logical positivism arrives at a paradox and it says, oh, as part of our logical positivist account, also we have ex falso quod libe, so I fooled you and now I'll fool you however I want. Signed, Bertrand Russell. And it's like, I'm sorry, Lord Russell, but you're going to have to, 0 equals 1 that. The cardinal error of logical positivism is to deny reason in the name of logic. And that goes to show that it's like, no, we keep reason and logic both. We just have classical quasi-modal logic and kind of put it in the box where it belongs. What ought philosophy to be? And then one of the last statements he says is, if we pursue philosophy at all, there's no reason to confine ourselves to critical philosophy. There is a reason to say that philosophy is critical philosophy, even when it's consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously uncritical, because that still goes to show that philosophy is first class in that sense. It can still be considered part of the thinking and reasoning. But it's nice though, and I enjoyed that book, and I'd like to read some more about that. So John Stuart Mill, and then that was Barnes, and it's Rejection of More. And this Collingwood is the essay on the philosophic method. This is something else we were reading last time. To the progress of contemporary philosophy. The argument is technical in nature. The duty of a philosopher as a writer is therefore to avoid the technical vocabulary proper to science. Now, and to choose his words according to the rules of literature. So I would say that this is for popularization and it counts, but it's not necessarily so that a writer or a speaker in philosophy has to water it down at all, because the same technical terms will be true for everybody. And so relating that to common sense is, of course, reasonable to the sense that there's an old adage that anybody who knows something can explain it in so few words fully. And so that kind of goes, and that's part of the prose or the poesy. We have this Comenius language for all the truisms, the logical truth, and this Coleridge language for as well upholding the ideals of science and mathematics, combining prose and poesy, a communication with the pleasure of reading and the vagaries of reading and writing, that it's not necessarily so what Collingwood has put here. Let's see a little bit more about it. His terminology must have that expressiveness, that flexibility, that dependence upon context, which are the hallmarks of literary use of words as opposed to a technical use of symbols. So this is for our postmodernist literary theory and critical deconstruction as with regards to the difference or the disfigurist, as was read here from some of the postmodern literary critics, that this is true in a sense as it helps reflect a great egalitarianism between all the readers and writers, and that none of them read the same text. The idea being something like everybody watches the same movie, nobody reads the same book, or they read the same book for themselves. That while that may be so, then we have for our technical philosophy that we can have it be in terms of these terms as well. Our theory of truth can be stronger than mere pragmatism, and whether I like it or not, it's something's true is true, and whether I understand it or not, that 0, 1, and infinity are numbers, are these kinds of things. Then after a while, one finds that they do make sense, and they do all add up, and they do all cancel out to be simpler and nice and figured out, these kinds of ways. These two characteristics, what seem to be rigidity and artificiality, are precisely those which ordinary language is distinct from a technical vocabulary possesses, differentiated by shades of meaning. The equivocal. It is easy to verify this statement by comparing the scientific definition of such a word as circle, with the account given, for example, in the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, what the same word means or may mean in ordinary usage. It's both. It's a Platonic ideal as well, and it's a Platonic form, mathematically. Even the Pythagoreans had a perfect circle. If it is argued, according to the method followed elsewhere in this essay, that since technical terms are used in science, something corresponding to them, mutatis mutandis, the same either way, will be found in philosophy, the modifications necessary to change the concept of a technical term from the shape appropriate to science and the shape appropriate to philosophy will deprive it exactly what makes it a technical term and convert it into ordinary speech. Now, this is argued against usually with regards to like Herbrand semantics, or that otherwise any technical language has an unambiguous representation in natural language. So that gets into the impredicativity. It gets into vagaries of quantification. It gets into other things that natural language has as built-in features. All, any, each, every, exists one, and these kinds of things that go to show that while there are different realms of these, and that one can't simply say that you just need to give a generous reading something for it to be technical. Has that where there is one, and in a particularly refined form of the technical and the simplified of the natural, they are one. So this just reflects that it's an effort. It's kind of a conscious thing to make it so. The language of philosophy is therefore, as every careful reader of the great philosophers already knows, a literary language and not a technical. So this is, from my perspective, this is technical philosophy here. So no, not everybody knows that. In poetry, prose and poetry are philosophically distinct species of a genus. Philosophy is a kind of literature, well, the idea of system. Now, system is for a model theory, a systematic form. Scientists and historians and other students try to present their knowledge from time to time in a systematic form. Of course, that's one of the greatest things, is to make tables of things, to make diagrams of things, to connect things, to relate things. That's great. And their systems, though bound to be superseded, serve a necessary purpose. Not closing the doors of the future, but rather opening them. For in order to advance in knowledge, we must first know where we stand. And no student can take stock of his position without attempting to state it systematically. That's agreeable. Gets into Spinoza a bit here. So we got Spinoza, Kant, critical or transcendental propedeutic. If the first principles of philosophy are to be justified, they must be justified by that philosophy itself. So this is that in our metaphysics is kind of the meta theory. And so when someone's speaking of theory and you ask them, it's like, well, what's your meta theory? They either do or don't have an answer, and it either is or isn't the same. So here it's model theory. It's considered to be the theory and the meta theory and the meta theory. And so then with regards to first principles and final cause, they're the same. So yeah, this is a great thing. He mentions the vicious circle. So the vicious circle, or the slippery slope, or the sinking sands, are each examples of phrases from the philosophy as with regards to ultimately either irrationality or unreasonableness or paradox, that then are as for the either ab absurdum, the usual idea of it goes away absurd and it's not rational, or ad infinitum, as in it's fuller and fuller and fuller, decimated until it reaches a finite limit, and that is its sum, or its infinitely divided a partitioning of a sort. That the vicious circle is a regular concept, and then the vicious fishbowl is the idea of like an open forum where any concept or wording or a phrase can be treated not just as a fishbowl, which is a form of critique where it's like you're either in or out of the fishbowl, but the vicious fishbowl. So the vicious circle and the slippery sands, or slippery slope, and the sliding or sinking sands are these usual things. When Descartes, dissatisfied with the results of all systematic thinking before his own day, resolved to begin again from the beginning, he did not explicitly distinguish the case of philosophy from that of the other sciences. And that's as usual, perceived to be a good thing of Descartes, who doesn't have a system of all logic and philosophy. He just says, I at least have this one here, and you're welcome to your own. And here, let me give you all examples why mine is so great. He says something about the axioms of philosophy. And so here it's just de res, de natura, de re, of the reason, of the nature, of the real. And that is for the deon, or the ontology, the being, the epistemology of these things, of the individual and of the whole. The second are special axioms. The first are logical axioms. So he says that the axioms of this philosophy are the logical axioms and then the scientific axioms. And that's kind of what we have here too. Philosophical inference, that there's what's considered, that are at least these two parts. So sometimes logical positivists today will say, oh, there's only science. There's no mathematical truth. And we're going to so frame it that way. And that way, if something ever goes wrong with this theory I sold you, well, that's too bad because it never came with a guaranteed truth to begin with. Well, then the idea here is that there is at least one that is, so you can't say that, well, I didn't know that was true and say that that was a defense, because ignorance is not a defense. But it is nice here that Collingwood breaks the axioms of philosophy into mathematical and logical and scientific. So this is largely agreeable, and if then that he kind of lays off to give the philosophers an easy way out of the course without having to become particularly technical. But here, to be a technical philosopher, it involves foundations in all of logic, all of mathematics, the logic and the mathematics, and the physics and the science. A technical philosophy, a theory. Here then, that's usually called a theory, as in, well, in the definition of theory, what is a theory? Does there exist one at all? A universal, in a sense, theory, a theory. And then it's also for the letter A, like this is our A game, or this is type A, primary, a theory. And it's considered usually here it's an axiomless natural deduction, which arrives from nothing and everything being at all, and then that the universal quantifiers are just one thing, and that there is one. It falls in to make a great theory of everything, and it's filled out by strong mathematical Platonism that it really makes the mathematical universal hypothesis too. So there is such a thing, and it's not so deep to not be relayed in so few words. The minimum realization of the generic essence is already, so far as it goes, a realization of this essence, and therefore distinct from other realizations. But as a limiting case, it is an extreme, and therefore an opposite relatively to the rest of the scale. It talks about the scale of forms, though, with regards to the phenomenological, and then with regards to the aesthetic, and those being subjective, for sure. Well, there are ideals of virtues and aesthetics. Plato and Leibniz. Of Locke's degrees of knowledge, the highest intuition is alone wholly knowledge. The lowest judgment never amounts to knowledge, no, not that which is the lowest degree of it. And the middle demonstration is intermediate in degree, showing as it does some sparks of bright knowledge. Well, then I'll look to Locke about that, because then we got Kant with judgment, and we use that for logical inference. And what that means is, well, yeah, according to deduction and induction and this theory that we have, it is so. What is so is so. And so then that said, in terms of people knowing that, the exact correspondence and point of structure between this scale and the Platonic scales of being or pleasure is especially instructive in a philosopher who can hardly be accused of Platonizing tendencies. So he says that logical positivism will be there if you can build whatever theory you want. Logical positivism is what it gets into, and that there's a stronger logical positivism, is there is one, and it fits. Metaphysics, aesthetics, and whatever other philosophical sciences are recognized. So see, according to his axioms, he's got both a philosophical science and a philosophical logic. There are words which are used in two different ways, a philosophical and a scientific. There are words that are the same. The overlap of classes to give an account of the universal, traditional logic. On Kant's program, therefore, there were in future to be two distinct philosophies, a methodology which conceived himself to have given to the world in a definitive shape, and a substantive philosophy which, guided by this methodology, would be able to progress indefinitely. But this division, however attractive at first sight, was soon found unsatisfying. So far from being definitive, the critique of pure reason brought the problems of methodology into the provocus of men's thought, and gave rise to discussions which to some extent diverted them from metaphysics, and for a time made that appear a dead subject. And even Kant himself was not clear in his own mind about the relation between the two things, for he saw that in one sense critical philosophy was a part of metaphysics, though in another it was an introduction to it. Here it's kind of like the prior and posterior, and the posterior and prior again, and the continuing, perfect circle of these things. There's the vicious circle and the virtuous circle. Mathematics and dialectic are so far alike that each begins with an hypothesis. Let so and so be assumed. Well, for strong mathematical Platonism, it's that let so and so be assumed because it also is in accordance with all of the mathematics. Hilbert's infinite living, working museum of mathematics, where David Hilbert was an early 20th century mathematician who put out the Hilbert Program, that the Hilbert Program is the idea that there will be a foundations of all of mathematics. And he's got some great problems. He's like, these are some of these unknowns. What's great about some of them is that they're undecidable, that they even reflect that it's the non-standard or extraordinary that would decide both things either way, like various conjectures of Goldbach, or with regards to a point in infinity or not, or primes in infinity or not, and a bunch of other things to do with Hilbert's problems. Though Hilbert's infinite living working museum of mathematics reflects on Hilbert's thought experiment about infinity, that it's like, well, it's kind of like a hotel, and people arrive and you have to house them, and you can move them around so you never run out because it's infinite. But then that this that gets into the Dirichlet and the transfinite Dirichlet and Cohen's forcing and these things to do with the density of numbers in a continuum with regards to a linear continuum. That it's somewhat simplified, but it is discrete, and it reflects on the unbounded at least, which is nice. Then he talks more about Plato. Perhaps a mathematician, if I am fortunate enough to number mathematicians among my readers, may say to me, your account of the method used in exact sciences is altogether beside the mark. Modern mathematical theory has changed all that, and you are tilting at a man of straw. Well, here we're tilting it back. So I enjoy this, and it's quite thorough, and it gives an account of somebody who in their mental maturity and their mental development of a philosophical theory has arrived at least that they have a place. He's got a foothold for himself, and he sees the levers about, and so that's pretty cool. In an essay on philosophical method, and that it helps a lot when some other things would be so opinionated. That they give inductive accounts, and that's great. That then they could never know they were mistaken. There's no possible concept of that. And when it's given as part of the theory that out of ex falso quodlibet, that anybody could trick them and then trick them forever, it's just not modal. It's not. Aristotle, the ancient. Here's Alain Badiou's second manifesto for philosophy. So in the second manifesto for philosophy, Alain Badiou, he reflects that he is a greater Platonist again. And so we looked at this sometimes before. And so in his first manifesto on philosophy, it was written about 30 or 40 years before this one. And this second one, he helps reflect on that in terms of the deconstructive accounts in Derrida and Deleuze and Derrida, the primacy of syntax over semantics and etymology, semantic infinity, syntax as its essence. So that's words, and that's considered algebra and words and finite and counting numbers. And then that there's points and spaces in geometry, and continuum is like the universe compared to that. So one is building blocks, the other is the ocean. So he's saying that he's very structured in building blocks. The releve. What is aufgehoben is at the same time preserved, as has only lost its immediacy, but is not on that account annihilated. The difficulty posed by the translation of Aufbehen and Aufhebung consists, of course, in finding a word in another language with a dual signification of to put an end to, or suppress and to preserve. So this is kind of like the knockout and then the Entbergung, what is hidden and what is shown. That entropy and entropy are Aristotelian and Leibnizian, the same word, opposite meanings. That the very notion of the aletheic is to forget again, or to unforget the aletheia, that's which is forgotten, to disclose the knowledge. So this just is, again, here it's about the virtuous circle and the prior and posterior, those being in a roundabout account dependent on each other, subjective and objective to each other, the prior and posterior. For a modal and temporal account, that otherwise the philosophy of a logic is not classical and Aristotelian and Chrysippus too. So then Badiou gets into some other of these notions of complementary concepts self-contained within a single concept. Sursumé and sursenchon. Hegel's texts. Labarrière and Gijarsik throughout this chapter on Hegel and being an event. Now, when I looked through this before, the only thing I really wanted to point out that is at some point in time, he says, amicus Plato, I submit Plato, I amicus Plato. And it's kind of like, yeah, everybody does. It's in the technical philosophical world at some point. Because he brings an ontological commitment that is enduring, compared to, say, all the vagaries of the inconstancies and the perceived hypocrisies of the modern world as may be, which need not bear any weight on their ontological commitment with regards to their ontological harmony or ontological dissonance at all. They can be put down, is what I'm saying, because the criticality and the critical reason remains applicable in a brief sort of ontological commitment. We're Platonists, though. Our school is a Platonist school. And so is a French, and so is a German. And it's full also of the literary in relation and the speculative. The fact that a multiple is in some way localized, such that the multiple indifference of its being is assigned to a world, goes beyond the resource of this multiple being as thought by mathematics. So, in mathematics, the objects and the models are free in a sense that you can make a copy of one just by imagining two. And so when they're at least not related at all, otherwise except as representing a model of the things, a structure, a proof of the things, then it doesn't involve otherwise the bookkeeping of all the related rates that otherwise, that according to the theory of what they really are, that they really do have. So this comment of mathematics means that two people who have the same mathematics in terms of the relevance do not yet have to agree on other irrelevant things that do or don't have assigned attachments to the model theory of the numbers or geometry. Those being kind of two things yet one thing. And that gets into that relevance logic identifies what may be things that are related because they have related terms and things that are distinct that they don't. And then that the mathematical objects and being free in the sense also means that any two related just happenstancely whether it's to like an abstract table of zeros and ones, they both, two systems of propositions both have the same layout of which ones, that those propositions aren't otherwise necessarily related at all because they're a tiny incomplete fragment. So we can all have the same numbers and not at all share any other opinion necessarily. One can reasonably call logic a formal theory of relations. I agree. And there's also that logic is the structure of all relations. And so that's our theory of it. It follows that the thought of a pairing is a logic. Well, anything that's formal also has to be sound and valid and all these kinds of things. So that might run out a bit later. It is even possible. The technical form of this logic will be rendered a bit clearer in the next chapter. What is essential to grasp here is that a truth, insofar as it appears, is a singular body that enters into a differentiating relation with an infinity of other bodies according to the rules of a logic of relation. And that they're either infinitely many copies apiece, or if they're book gaping and kept structural together, then they are. They're either relevant or not. So that's a nice thing. Well, dear readers, gentle readers, fellow earthlings, I shall so hope you have a great day. Logos 2000 is a 21st century account of a modern monistic holism and a holistic monism, duly self-infer-consistent, advised by all the great, most modern mathematics we have, with at least 3 continuous domains, and a story of an account of philosophy and A theory. All one theory.